While I do genuinely adore vegetables, I have to admit I have a bit of a sweet tooth as well. There's nothing I like better than finishing a meal with something delicious for dessert. On today's episode of Paula Roy's Favorite Food, I'm going to show you 3 of my favorite easy recipes. Best of all, they're all no-bake. Lots of people tell me that they love pie and love cheesecake, but they find them too much of a bother to make. This dessert brings in all the best elements of those 2 desserts in a simple and delicious form. So I'm going to start by getting my apples ready to make an apple pie filling. Now, of course, you can buy commercial apple pie filling. It's perfectly adequate, but I find that sometimes it has more sugar than I would prefer. So by making my own, I can control the sugar level. So you want to cut your apple up into fairly small pieces, sort of 1/2 inch. And we're going to put them right into our pan, along with about a tablespoon of butter for the 2 apples. And I'm going to get that started heating now, just on a low heat. And we'll finish cutting the rest of our apples. As you may have heard me mention before, it's great to just cut around the core of your apple. It saves a little bit of time, and there's a tiny bit of waste, but it's really not too much. And I just find I cut so many apples, I'm always looking for that quick shortcut. Be sure to cut out any little bits of the core area, though, that may be stuck in there. And again, just looking for my 1/2 inch pieces. I'm using Gala apples. I really like their flavor. You can really use your favorite cooking apple, whether it's a Cortland, even a Macintosh. I find that apple preferences are so individual. And we're very lucky that we have access to good apples pretty much all year round. And the reason for cutting it smaller is that the apples will soften more quickly and will more closely mimic the texture of a traditional apple pie filling. A lot of times I will bake apples up this way before adding them to an actual pie, because then you're more concerned in the cooking time with the pastry and you don't have to worry about the filling. These are pretty big apples, so I think I'll just add a little bit more. There we go. And as you're going to see later on, you can absolutely make this filling ahead of time, and in fact you should, because you want it to be cool when it goes into the parfait. It doesn't have to be refrigerator cold, but it should be at least room temperature, if not colder. I'll often make it about a week ahead of time before I need it, and it probably keeps for up to 2 weeks in the fridge. Okay, so we've got our apples and butter in the pan. The butter's nicely melting and coating the apples. And I'm going to sprinkle on traditional apple pie spices. So I've got nutmeg and ginger and cinnamon, because those are the ones I like. Just give them a little swirl, sprinkle them on. If you like cloves or allspice, you can really add it any way you like. And as I mentioned, I like to control the sugar, so I'm just going to add a little bit of sugar to the apples. I've tasted these ones, and they're not too sweet, but they're not super sour either. And again, add a little bit of a stir. And last but not least, a little bit of water, just to help them soften a little bit more quickly. So now we just leave our apple pie filling to cook. I'm going to cover the pot, and that'll help speed things up. To get ready for the next step in the filling, I'm going to stir together some cornstarch and water, and that's what you'll find with commercial fillings. They're quite thick in texture, and this is how they achieve that. So I may not add all of this depending on how much moisture gets released from the apples, but I want to have it ready just in case. And when you make this ahead, as I'm doing a few minutes in advance, the cornstarch will settle to the bottom, so you'll need to stir it again. All right, so next up we're going to get our cream cheese layer ready, because this is a cheesecake. So I have some room temperature cream cheese. It's been out for about an hour, no longer than that. You can also use mascarpone if you prefer. They're pretty similar. And to that, I'm just going to add a little bit of sugar, because that's typical of a cheesecake. And I think that's probably going to be enough. And then you just want to mix them together. You can see how easy it is to blend the softened cream cheese. I've just prepared enough for 2 small parfaits, As with so many of my recipes, it's really easy to scale it up if you decide that you want to make a larger quantity. So now that our cream cheese layer is ready, we can set that aside and we'll move on to our crust. And in this case, we're doing graham crackers. I'm going to break them as I put them in my bag just to speed up the crumbing process. And if you're looking for gluten-free options, there are some really tasty gluten-free graham crackers available now. So that could be good for your family if that's important. So now, as I did before with the bottom of a mug, I'm just going to crush them. You want to get a fairly fine crumb this time because we're going to be adding melted butter to make it more like a cheesecake crust, although we will still be sprinkling it on top, not pressing it into a pan. There, I'm pretty happy with that. So it's going to go into this bowl. And many cheesecake recipes say to add sugar to the graham cracker crumbs along with melted butter. I'm not adding the sugar. The graham crackers are already sweet enough. So in goes the melted butter. And you could absolutely use a dairy-free butter, just like you could use a dairy-free cream cheese. And we're going to give that a stir. So there's our crumb layer. Now we're going to check on our apples. Oh, and they're bubbling away. They look so good. So when they're halfway to being softened, and I'm going to test that with a knife, then it's a great time to add in the cornstarch. Oh yeah, they're doing really well. So I'm going to add in the cornstarch and water mixture. As I said, I may not need it all. You don't want it to be thick like glue. You just want it to kind of hold together. And I think one more spoonful should do it. And then that will need to cook down for about 2 more minutes to thicken and to finish softening the apples. They will continue to soften even once you take them off the heat because of the residual moisture in the pan, so there's no need to overcook them. Now, because I have magically already made some filling and cooled it, as I mentioned, I can turn this off and finish it off later. So now it's time to assemble our parfaits. And there are so many different kinds of vessels you can use for this. This is another one that would be a great candidate for mason jars, and because it's quite a sturdy mixture, you could make them ahead of time, put the lids on, and transport them if you wanted to take them to a cottage or a picnic or someone's house for a dessert. These are actually IKEA candle holders that I bought a few years ago, and I think they just make really pretty parfait glasses, so that's what we're going to use today. So I'm going to start with apples in the bottom because I really want lots and lots of apples in my parfait. And depending on your vessel, you can do 1, 2, or 3 layers, just depending on what you have room for. I'm going to follow that up with some of the cream cheese. And you probably need 2 spoons to push it off because it's fairly stiff. And how much you use of each is really up to you. As I've said before, I love dishes like this where you can make it and assemble your own station, and then it's really fun. Some people might just want apple, or they might just want cream cheese and the graham cracker crumbs, who knows. Now you can see that I have quite a quantity of apple filling here, more than I need for these desserts. This is also terrific over hot cooked oatmeal porridge. You can put it on granola, spread it on toast, so it has lots of uses. So don't worry if you make a big batch and don't use it all for your parfaits. And now we're going to put on our crust layer, and then we will repeat them all again. A little bit more apple, and you can kind of press it down as you add them, just to fill the dish nicely. You can also put the cream cheese in a Ziploc bag and pipe it on top if you want to make them really fancy. Just get a little more off our spoons. And these are very fridge stable desserts, so easy to assemble ahead, as I may have mentioned. One last layer of crumbs. And now our no-bake apple pie cheesecake parfaits are ready for our sweet teeth to enjoy.
As a proud Maritimer, if you come to my house for coffee or tea, I'm quite likely to offer squares to go with your beverage. I love making squares and always have some in the freezer. Coming up next is my new favorite recipe for squares.
If you're like me and like to cut up apples and take them with you for a snack, but get discouraged when they go brown, here's a hot tip. Soak them in 2 cups of water mixed with 2 tablespoons of lemon juice for 3 to 5 minutes, then rinse them off and pack them in your container, and they won't go brown. These no-bake squares are such a snap to put together. I absolutely love them. Graham cracker base, something I'm very fond of. My mom used to make these with social tea cookies. So there's lots of options for a not too sweet cookie base, crumbed up fairly finely. To that, I'm gonna add the zest of a lemon. Make sure you always wash your lemons before you zest them. And when you're zesting them, try not to get down to the white pith underneath because it can be a little bit bitter. So you're just trying to get the colorful part of the lemon or lime or orange, depending on what you're doing. This just adds a subtle lemon flavor to the base of the squares, and then we'll have a nice lemony layer on top. Okay, I'm happy with that. In it goes. And now we're going to add in the rest of our base layer ingredients. We have desiccated coconut. So this is a little bit finer than flaked coconut, and you should look for the label at the grocery store. And sweetened or unsweetened, it doesn't really matter, whatever you can find. And some melted butter that will help it stick together. And the magic ingredient that features in a lot of traditional squares is sweetened condensed milk. And this is just a half a cup, so if you open a can, it's just over a cup. Fear not, you can actually refrigerate or even freeze leftover condensed milk. So we're just going to add that in. And that's as easy as the base layer is. And sometimes with squares that have a base and a topping, you do need to bake the base layer, but not this one. And now it's a bit of a game to stir them all together. If you want to make it a little easier, especially if you've got kids helping you out, you can mix the butter and condensed milk, the melted butter and condensed milk together before you add them. And that will make the stirring a little bit easier. I know that was something that my kids complained about. Even with a single batch of chocolate chip cookies, they found the stirring exhausting. So just keep going until you pretty much can't see any more big patches of dry crumbs. We're just about there. And then what you want to have ready is an 8x8 sized baking pan lined with parchment paper. You could grease the pan, but it really is tricky to cut the squares inside the pan. It's so much easier just to lift it out by the parchment edges and place the whole slab of squares on a cutting board and cut them. So we're going to pop this in our prepared pan. And when you're initially putting it in, don't worry too much about distributing it evenly. You can fix that when you go to press it down, which is our next step. And I find that a spatula like this is terrific. You could use your very clean hands if you'd like, even a frosting knife, just something that you can press down with some good force and try to get into all the corners and against all the edges. That way you'll have a complete pan full of squares, not losing spaces around the perimeter. Okay, so as I mentioned, this doesn't need to be baked, and nor does it need to be chilled. It does help if you have a little bit of time to tuck it in the fridge, but we're just gonna freestyle it today. And now we're gonna make the top layer, which I said is very lemony. So we're gonna squeeze out 3 tablespoons of lemon juice. And I like to do this with a strainer in my measuring cup to catch the seeds. And I really like a fruit reamer like this, a citrus reamer, to get the vegetables, all the juice out. I'm going to try and do this where you can see it. Occasionally a seed will jump over the side, doesn't really matter. Just fish them out. I've seen pro chefs masterfully squeeze lemons with their bare hands and catch the seeds in between their fingers or in the palm, and I don't know how they do it. It's very impressive. I just mastered one-handed egg cracking. I'm not ready for this. next challenge quite yet. And I'm just going to look at my cup, see where I am. Yep, that's 3 tablespoons. That was a really juicy lemon. I would have expected to need a whole lemon for that. So we're going to drizzle that in to our powdered sugar, sometimes called icing sugar or confectioner's sugar, depending on where your recipe's from. And some softened butter. So this is a buttercream frosting. And with any luck, we won't have icing sugar all over the room. Let's see what happens. And of course, you can mix this by hand. I just like the ease of using an electric mixer, especially this one because it's cordless, which is super handy. And you're going for a fairly thick frosting. If for reasons of humidity or elevation you find that it's too thick, you can always add a smidge more lemon juice or a couple of drops of water. I'm pretty happy with how this one's turning out, but I think I might add a tiny bit more lemon. It's pretty thick, almost too thick for me to spread. So back with our equipment here. It's always better to add a little bit less liquid at first and then add more later, because it's really hard to fix the problem if you add too much in the beginning. There we go. That's the consistency I was looking for. You just want to make sure it's smooth and that there's no lumps of icing sugar showing and no lumps of butter either. I'm going to give it 1 shot of speed. And it's done. And I can imagine somebody will be looking to lick those beaters later. So now you just want to add it to your base layer. And I do find an icing knife is great for this. Just work in small sections at a time, and you'll get it fairly evenly spread. And don't worry if a few crumbs come up from the bottom layer. You're going to be sprinkling a little bit more coconut on top, so that'll hide the crumbs. Once this step is accomplished and we sprinkle the coconut on top, these squares need to go in the refrigerator for at least an hour before you cut them. They really need to firm up. I sometimes make them ahead and just pop the pan in a container right into the freezer, and then I can pull them out a day or a week later and cut them when I'm ready to serve them. It makes a generous amount of frosting, but I don't think there's anything wrong with that personally. I haven't experimented with other flavors, but I'm sure you could mix it up and do an orange version. Grapefruit might be kind of even fun with coconut. And definitely lime and coconut, which is such a great tropical combo, would be fantastic. And I'm just smoothing out the icing a little bit, making sure it's even. That's it. And then I've got just a little bit more of the coconut, and it's easiest if you sprinkle it from your fingertips rather than from the bowl, because that way you can get right into all the corners. All right, so as I mentioned, this is going to be popping into the fridge, but in the meantime, here's a pan that has been prepared and cooled and cut. Don't these no-bake lemon coconut squares look amazing? I can't wait to bite into one.
Serving individual portions of dishes in canning jars is a fun format and perfect for my next recipe, which is easy to make, delicious, and super festive.
I've been a camper all my life, and there's nothing I like more than having s'mores around the campfire. So I started playing around at home, thinking there must be a way to take that classic dessert and make it in a different form, and I think I've cracked the code. So we're going to start with the marshmallow part, and since I don't have a campfire right here in my kitchen, I'm going to use a torch instead. I've got these little piles of mini marshmallows ready to get torched, so hang on. You can do this under a broiler if you don't have a kitchen torch. It doesn't take too much to get them started on scorching. And it's a great idea to do this first so that they have a chance to cool. And blow them out as you go along, no big deal. Okay, I'm happy with that. There we go, perfectly torched marshmallows. So excited. Now, one more is still burning. There we are. The classic s'mores preparation, of course, is graham crackers, but over the years I've tried lots of things. One of my favorite is chocolate coated digestive cookies, and then of course you add the extra layer of piece of chocolate bar in there. So good. But I was thinking, how can I make this a really Canadian thing? So I've decided that cream-filled maple cookies are the best thing to use for my s'mores parfaits. So as with the graham cracker escapades, I'm going to crush them in a bag. And they don't have to be too finely crushed, so I'm just going to use a rolling pin, give it a couple of passes. And you could definitely go as crazy as you want to with a dessert like this if you wanted to have M&Ms or chopped nuts, really anything you want. It's very much a DIY sort of thing. And into the bowl to make it easier to serve. You could serve it right out of the bag, especially if you were doing this like in a picnic setting or whatever. The frosting kind of makes them stick, but then of course it also makes them way more delicious. There we go. And my other ingredient is that I'm going to use chocolate chips instead of pieces of chocolate bar, just because I feel like if you're eating this with a spoon, it's going to be a lot easier to pick up. But you could even chop up chocolate bars if you like. Take something like a caramel or an Hershey almond bar, anything that you really like, and it would be your great chocolate moment in there. The little mini Rolos could be really fun too. I haven't tried those yet, but I think I must. So we're going to start in our jars, and I'm just using regular 1-cup canning jars. But there's also lots of really pretty ones available from places like the dollar store. So this is obviously a little bit smaller. I don't want a serving that small. I want this size. But you can look for lots of different jars. And as always, you could make it in a wine glass, whatever you want. So I'm going to put some of the cookie layer in the bottom, just crushing a few of the bigger bits here. And I'm using whipped cream in a can because it's easy, fitting with the sort of camping format. I should mention that you can also get spray coconut cream in a can. So if you're looking for a non-dairy option, that would be really great. So we're going to add in a generous squirt of this. And because the cream will deflate, you can add quite a bit because it'll get packed down. And now with our chocolate chips, don't skimp on those either. This is kind of a go big or go home sort of dessert. There's a cookie that needs a little help. There we go. So then another layer of each again. And I'm just kind of packing them down. Don't want to leave that frosting behind. Too good. I have made these with a drizzle of chocolate sauce in addition to the chocolate chips, and I can confirm that that was really, really yummy. Oh, yeah, we're going to do this and then our chocolate chips. And I'm going to try and get some to kind of tuck down the sides a little bit. Little skillful addition there. There we go. And last but not least, we're going to add our torched marshmallows. So you'll probably need a spoon or a scoop to pick them up if they're still a little bit hot. And you just pop them on top. They're sticky and wonderful. I think I can actually manage these ones. They've cooled off with my fingertips. I have served this as the finishing touch at a rather elegant dinner party, and people just about whooped with delight. So if you're looking for something fun, why not try a no-bake s'mores parfait? No-bake sweets are a staple of my dessert repertoire, particularly when it's too hot to turn on the oven. If you serve up these luscious lemon coconut no-bake squares or these fantastic apple pie cheesecake parfaits, not to mention fun and festive s'mores parfaits, they are bound to disappear in an instant.